40 million dead. 11% of the entire human population was wiped out. So many people slaughtered that the planet actually cooled down because there was nobody left to farm the land. The man sitting across from me did all of that. And today he agreed to talk. Your father got poisoned when you were 9. What do you remember about that day?
The smell. Poison does something ugly to a man on the way out. My father, Yesuge, crawled back to camp with bile and blood pouring down his chin. He dropped face down in the dirt in front of my mother, shaking so hard his teeth cracked together. I grabbed his face with both hands, trying to hold him still, and watched his eyes go from alive to glass in about 30 seconds. He was dead before the sun went down. I was 9 years old with his blood crusted under my fingernails for 3 days because we had no water to wash.
Then your own people threw you out.
One elder rode past my mother on his horse and said, "The dead do not need a clan." They took the horses, the sheep, the tents, and walked away, left a widow and 5 children standing barefoot in the snow with nothing. But they made one mistake. They let us live. And I have a very long memory.
How did you survive?
Rats, marmots, roots pulled out of frozen ground with bleeding fingers. My mother chewed dried animal hide to soften it so my youngest brothers could swallow without choking. Some nights we sat in the dark with nothing at all, just counting each other's heartbeats to make sure nobody had died in their sleep. But that was not even the worst part of my childhood.
What was?
My half-brother begged her. He was bigger than us, and he stole whatever food we caught. Fish, birds, field mice, anything that kept us breathing, he grabbed it from our hands and ate it while we watched. I warned him twice. He shoved my face into the dirt and told me I was nothing. So Kassar and I tracked him to a hill with arrows and crept up from both sides. He saw us coming. He did not run. He sat down on the grass, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Do not destroy this family." I pulled the string back and shot him through the chest. I watched him fall sideways and bleed out into the dirt. I was 12 years old. That was my first kill. My mother called me a murderer. She was right. But nobody touched our food again after that.
Years later, you went back for the Tatars who poisoned your father. What did you do to them?
I lined up every Tatar male next to a wagon wheel. If your head stood taller than the axle, you died where you stood. My soldiers moved down the line one by one. Thousands of men and teenage boys measured against a wooden spoke and cut down in front of their screaming mothers and sisters. The women were divided among my warriors. The boys too short to reach the line were taken into Mongol families. That tribe poisoned my father and stole my childhood from me. So I erased them. There is no Tatar nation today. That is not an accident.
You went back for Taichiud too? The ones who enslaved you?
Every face I memorized while they beat me in the dirt, I found years later. I tracked down the man who held my face in horse urine, and I made sure his death took long enough for him to remember what he did to a boy in a wooden collar. I am not going to describe it, but I will tell you, he remembered.
Then you got captured and enslaved. What did they do to you?
The Taichiud locked a wooden collar around my neck, so heavy my spine bent. They dragged me through camp on a chain like livestock. One warrior shoved my face into a puddle of horse urine and held me under until my lungs burned, and I thought I was going to drown right there in the dirt. Their children threw rocks at my head for entertainment, while adults stood around laughing. And every night I lay on the ground, memorizing their faces and promising myself that one day I would come back and make them wish they had just killed me when they had the chance.
The escape. How did you pull it off?
Their guard got blind drunk during a feast. I swung that collar into his jaw and felt the bone crack through the wood. He went down without a sound. I sprinted for the river and threw myself into water so cold it felt like 1,000 needles stabbing every inch of my skin at once. I shoved my body into the mud under the reeds and breathed through a gap no wider than 2 fingers. A hunter stood directly above me for so long I could smell the sweat on his boots. I held my breath until the world went black at the edges, and my chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. He walked away. The boy they tortured in that camp drowned in that river. What crawled out was the thing that would burn their entire world down. But before I got to any of that, something happened that broke me worse than any collar ever did.
Borta?
The Merkits hit our camp in the dark. I heard my wife screaming my name over and over while they threw her across a horse and rode off into the night. And I ran. I ran into the mountains and hid in the rocks like a coward because I did not have enough men to fight back. I sat in the dark listening to her voice get smaller and smaller until it disappeared into nothing. That sound lived inside my skull for the rest of my life. Every city I burned after that night, part of me was still sitting on those rocks, listening to her scream.
What happened to her?
She was handed to a Merkit warrior like stolen property. Months passed. I spent every one of them gathering allies, swearing oaths, making promises I would keep in blood. When I finally rode back, I burned that entire tribe to ash. Found Borte alive, pregnant. Neither of us ever said out loud what we were both thinking. I named the boy Jochi and claimed him as my firstborn. But the whispers about whose blood ran through his veins never stopped for the rest of his life.
Your own sons turned on each other over that question.
Chagatai called Jochi a Merkit bastard in front of 100 generals during a war council. Jochi lunged across the tent and grabbed his brother's throat. Guards ripped them apart while I sat on my throne, watching the empire I bled for nearly crack in half. Jochi died young after that. Some say I ordered it. I did not give that command, but I did not protect him from the men who may have carried it out either. That is the honest answer nobody else will give you. And it gets darker than that.
How?
My son, Tului, the youngest. He had my hunger for war, but none of my patience. At the city of Merv, his soldiers spent 13 days counting the dead. The final number came back at 1,300,000 from a single city. When he reported it to me, his voice was completely flat. No pride, no guilt, just numbers, like reading a grocery list. That was the child I raised.
Modern historians say those numbers are impossible. That Merv did not have 1 million people inside its walls.
I do not care what men sitting in comfortable rooms 800 years later believe. My chroniclers counted for 13 days. They were not guessing. Were the numbers exact to the last body? Maybe not. But the fields outside that city were black with the dead for miles. You do not need to trust my number to understand the scale. Walk through that region today. Ask why it never recovered. The ground remembers even if historians want to argue.
You chose Ogadai to inherit the empire. Why the drunk over the warrior?
Because Jochi and Chagatai would have started a civil war within a week of my death. Ogadai was the only one all 4 brothers could tolerate sitting in the same tent. I told him to cut the drinking. He promised to limit himself to a set number of cups per day, then ordered bigger cups made. He thought it was funny. I did not. But he was the only option that kept everything from falling apart.
Before the conquests, there was Jamuka, your blood brother. Tell me about that.
We cut our palms open as boys, pressed the wounds together, and swore loyalty under the sky. I loved that man more than most of my own blood, but power split us apart. He raised an army against me, and we fought for years. When his own men finally dragged him to me in chains expecting gold, I executed every one of those traitors on the spot. Then I stood face to face with Jamuka and begged him to rule beside me. He looked at me with dead, tired eyes and said 2 suns cannot share one sky. He asked for a death without blood touching the earth. So I had his back broken, clean, quiet. I sat alone in my tent that whole night. That was the only kill in my entire life that hurt.
After Jamuka, you unified every tribe, and they named you Genghis Khan. Then came the killing on a scale nobody had ever seen. Walk me through how you killed your enemies.
For a city that opened its gates, nobody was harmed. For a city that resisted, then surrendered, the warriors were pulled from the crowd and executed. For a city that fought to the last man, everything inside died. But let me tell you about specific men who crossed me.
The governor of Otrar. The man who started the Khwarezm War by killing your merchants.
I had molten silver poured into his eyes and his ears. He loved treasure more than human life, so I gave him all the silver he could hold. He screamed until his throat gave out, and then he just sat there with his mouth open and nothing coming out. That was the message.
The Russian princes at Kalka River.
My generals, Subutai and Jebe, crushed 80,000 soldiers in a single afternoon. The captured Russian princes, including Mstislav of Kiev, were laid flat on the ground. My soldiers placed a heavy wooden platform on top of their living bodies, and then sat down on that platform to eat their victory feast. Those princes were slowly crushed to death, while my men drank and laughed, inches above their fading screams. Death without spilling royal blood on the earth. We considered it an honor. They did not agree.
Human shields? Plague catapults?
We marched captured civilians in front of our army toward their own city walls. Archers up top had to choose between killing their neighbors or letting us walk through the gates. And when plague hit our camps during a siege, we loaded rotting corpses onto catapults and launched them over the walls. Disease tore through the population faster than any sword. You call it biological warfare. We just called it winning.
The Khwarezm campaign. The numbers.
500 merchants sent with a peace offer, all robbed and murdered. A second envoy was sent to the Shah. He cut off their heads and mailed them back to me. So I gathered 200,000 horseback warriors, and I rode west to erase an empire.
Bukhara?
Rode my horse through the doors of their grand mosque and told everyone on their knees that I was the punishment of God. That if they had not sinned, the sky would not have sent me. And I believed it, every syllable. But Bukhara surrendered. They opened the gates. So the city survived. That mercy had a cost, though, because word travels fast on the Silk Road. The next city heard that Bukhara got to live, so they fought back, thinking they could do better.
Which city?
Nishapur, and they killed the wrong person. An arrow from the walls struck my daughter's husband during the siege. She came to me shaking so hard she could barely stand. She did not ask for justice. She demanded erasure. I gave the order. Everything inside those walls died. Men, women, children, babies, dogs, horses. When it was over, soldiers walked through the streets beheading corpses to make sure nobody was faking death. They sorted the skulls into 3 pyramids. Men, women, children, stacked outside the gates. My daughter asked for that arrangement personally. She wanted the next city in line to see it from a distance and know exactly what was coming.
And the next city was Urgench.
They saw the pyramids. They fought anyway. So I set a kill quota. 24 bodies per soldier. 50,000 soldiers. You do the math.
That math comes out to over 1 million. And again, historians say those numbers are inflated. That chroniclers loyal to your empire had reasons to exaggerate the terror.
Let me ask you something. If I am lying about the numbers, why did I then destroy the dams and flood the irrigation canals? Farmland that fed civilizations for thousands of years turned to sand in a decade because there was nobody left alive to repair them. Some of that ground is still dead today. 3/4 of Iran's population was gone by the time I finished that campaign. Argue about whether it was 800,000 or 1 million. The land does not care about the difference.
Do you feel anything when you say those numbers?
Guilt is for men who did things they did not mean to do. I meant every last bit of it. I would do it again right now if the sky asked. But I also built something on top of those graves that changed the course of human history. A merchant could walk from Beijing to the Mediterranean without being robbed. I built a postal system faster than anything for the next 500 years. Gunpowder and paper moved west. Persian science moved east. I banned kidnapping women, made law equal for rich and poor, and declared religious freedom everywhere I ruled. Mosques stood next to churches and temples in my cities, and all of them were tax-exempt. That sits right next to the skull pyramids, both mine.
Your empire at its peak covered 24 million square kilometers. 1 in 4 humans alive lived under your rule. Researchers at the Carnegie Institution confirmed your wars scrubbed 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere because there was nobody left to farm the land. You literally changed the climate of the planet. What do you say to that?
I say no other human being in the history of this Earth has ever left a fingerprint on the actual temperature of the planet. I did it with horses and arrows.
You died in 1227. Nobody has ever found your grave.
My soldiers killed every person they passed on the road home. The grave diggers were executed. Their executioners were killed by a 3rd unit. Horses trampled the ground flat, trees planted thick. 800 years of searching and not a trace. 16 million men alive today carry my DNA. My blood runs through millions of people who have zero idea they are walking around with the genes of a man who cooled the planet down by killing.
Last question. Monster or genius?
I was the starving boy who ate rats in the dirt and became the man who reshaped the climate of the Earth with a sword. I was both of those things. Every day I drew breath. And if you put me back at the beginning tomorrow, with nothing but bloody hands and a dead father lying in the dirt, I would burn it all down again. Every city, every empire, every last one of them. Slower this time, so they felt it more, without changing a single breath.
He answered every question I asked tonight, every single one. But there is one thing he would not talk about. What actually happened in August of 1227. The real cause of his death. The history books say he fell off a horse. His closest generals told a completely different story, one involving a captured queen, a locked tent, and a night that his own sons refused to speak about for the rest of their lives. That story, and the bloody civil war his grandsons fought over the empire he left behind,